Maya Rodriguez walked into her auto shop class on that Tuesday morning, carrying her tool bag and trying to ignore the usual whispers. At 16, she was the only girl in a class of 23 students, and she felt every pair of eyes on her. As she made her way to her workstation, the garage smelled like motor oil and metal, a scent that reminded her of Saturday mornings with her grandfather. He had taught her everything about engines when she was little, showing her how each part worked together like pieces of a puzzle. But here at school things were different. Here she had to prove herself every single day. Her classmates were already gathered around their workbenches, talking loudly about weekend plans and football games. Maya quietly organized her tools, listening to their conversations about cars and engines. She knew more than most of them, but she rarely spoke up. Speaking up meant drawing attention, and attention meant dealing with comments she would rather avoid. Mr. Peterson, their instructor, walked in carrying a steaming cup of coffee. He was a decent teacher, fair to everyone, but even he sometimes seemed surprised when Maya knew the right answer. He had been teaching auto shop for 20 years, and Maya was only the third girl to ever take his class. "All right, everyone, settle down," Mr. Peterson called out, setting his coffee on his desk. "I have something special for you today, something that's going to separate the real mechanics from the wannabes." The class grew quiet, curious about what their teacher had planned. Maya looked up from her tools, interested despite herself. Mr. Peterson had a reputation for challenging projects, but there was something different in his voice today. "Tommy, help me wheel this in," Mr. Peterson said, nodding toward the door. Tommy Chen, one of the more helpful students in class, followed the teacher outside. A moment later, they returned, pushing a wheeled platform that held the most beaten-up bar truck Maya had ever seen. It was an old Chevrolet pickup, probably from the 1970s, with faded blue paint and rust eating through the metal like a disease. The truck looked like it had been sitting in someone's backyard for decades. The tires were flat, the chrome was pitted with corrosion, and the windshield had a spiderweb crack running across it. But what really caught everyone's attention was when Mr. Peterson popped the hood. The engine bay was a disaster. Years of neglect had turned everything into a rusty, oil-covered mess. Wires hung loose like dead vines, and you could barely make out the shape of the actual engine beneath all the grime and corrosion. It looked like something that belonged in a junkyard, not a classroom. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Mr. Peterson said, with a grin, patting the fender. "This little lady hasn't run in 15 years. The previous owner, old Frank Martinez, brought her to every mechanic in town. Every single one told him the same thing. She's beyond repair. Not worth the effort." The students crowded around the truck, some laughing at the sorry state of the engine. Maya stayed back, but she could see everything from where she stood. Despite the mess, something about the truck intrigued her. Maybe it was the solid way it was built, or the fact that someone had once cared enough to keep it running for so many years. "Here's the deal," Mr. Peterson continued, raising his voice over the chatter. "Whoever can get this engine running again gets an automatic A for the semester. And I mean running smooth, not just turning over once and dying." The announcement caused an immediate stir. An automatic A was worth fighting for, especially since auto shop could be a tough class to ace. Several students immediately stepped forward, already claiming they could fix it. Jake Morrison was the first to speak up. Jake was the kind of student who thought he knew everything about cars because his older brother worked at a garage. He was loud, overconfident, and always ready to show off. He also made it his business to remind Maya that she didn't belong in their class. "I'll have this running in 3 days," Jake announced, rolling up his sleeves. "My brother taught me everything about engines. This is going to be easy money." Other students quickly joined in, each claiming they would be the one to fix the impossible truck. David Park said he had rebuilt engines before. Miguel Santos bragged about helping his father with their family's auto repair business. Even quiet, Robert Kim stepped forward, saying he was willing to try. Maya watched as they gathered around the truck, each trying to get a closer look at the engine. They were all talking at once, pointing at different parts and making confident predictions about what was wrong and how to fix it. But as they looked closer, their confidence began to fade. The engine was worse than it had appeared from a distance. Everything was seized up solid. The pistons wouldn't move. The valves were stuck and half the components were so corroded they were barely recognizable. What had seemed like a challenging but doable project now looked impossible. One by one, the students began backing away. David Park shook his head and muttered something about needing a completely new engine. Miguel Santos whistled low and said it would cost more to fix than the truck was worth. Even Jake, who had been so confident just minutes before, grew quiet as he stared at the mechanical disaster in front of him. "Anyone else want to take a shot?" Mr. Peterson asked, looking around the room. The classroom had grown quiet. Maya could hear the wall clock ticking and the distant sound of another class using power tools down the hall. She found herself drawn to the truck, stepping closer to get a better look at the engine. The more she looked, the more curious she became. Yes, it was a mess, but underneath all that rust and grime, she could see that this had once been a well-built machine. The engine block looked solid, and some of the components seemed too advanced for a regular pickup truck from that era. Jake noticed her examining the engine and saw an opportunity. He had been embarrassed by his quick retreat from the challenge, and picking on Maya always made him feel better about himself. "What are you staring at, Rodriguez?" Jake called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you can fix what real mechanics couldn't?" The classroom went completely silent. Everyone turned to look at Maya, who felt her face grow warm. She had been hoping to examine the engine without drawing attention, but now all eyes were on her. "I mean, come on," Jake continued, encouraged by the attention. "If guys who actually know about engines can't fix this thing, what makes you think you can? You barely talk in class, and when you do, you're always asking basic questions." That wasn't true, and Maya knew it. She rarely asked questions because she usually already knew the answers. But explaining that would only make things worse. Instead, she just stood there feeling the weight of everyone's stares. "Tell you what," Jake said, warming up to his theme, "I dare you to try. But when you fail, and you will fail, you have to stand up in front of the class and admit that you don't belong here. Admit that auto shop isn't for girls." Maya's heart started pounding. She could feel anger building in her chest, but also something else, a determination that reminded her of her grandfather. He had always told her that the best way to handle bullies was to prove them wrong through action, not words. She thought about all the Saturdays she had spent in her grandfather's garage, learning how engines worked from the inside out. She remembered how patient he had been, explaining each component and showing her how everything connected. He had taught her that every engine was just a puzzle, and every puzzle could be solved with enough patience and knowledge. "I accept," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. The classroom erupted in whispers and surprised comments. Jake looked stunned that she had actually taken the dare. Even Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow, though he didn't try to talk her out of it. "You're serious?" Jake asked, apparently not having expected her to agree. "Dead serious," Maya replied, looking directly at him. "But when I get this engine running, you're the one who's going to apologize in front of the class." Jake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Deal. This should be entertaining." As the bell rang and students filed out to their next classes, Maya stayed behind, still staring at the broken truck. Mr. Peterson approached her, his expression concerned. "Maya, you don't have to do this," he said quietly. Jake was just being a jerk. "You have nothing to prove to him or anyone else." "Maybe not," Maya replied, running her hand along the truck's fender. "But I have something to prove to myself." That evening, Maya couldn't stop thinking about the truck. She pulled out her notebook and started sketching what she remembered of the engine, trying to identify all the problems she would need to solve. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that this wasn't just any ordinary engine. Something about the way it was built, the components she had glimpsed beneath the rust, suggested that this truck was hiding secrets. And Maya, Rodriguez had never been able to resist a good mystery, especially one that involved engines. As she fell asleep that night, she was already planning her approach. Tomorrow, she would begin the biggest challenge of her young life. She would prove that determination and knowledge mattered more than what other people expected. And maybe, just maybe, she would discover something that would change everything. The next morning, Maya arrived at school 30 minutes early. She wanted to get to the auto shop before anyone else, to have some quiet time with the truck before the chaos of class began. The hallways were mostly empty, with only the sound of her footsteps echoing as she made her way to the garage. Mr. Peterson was already there, grading papers at his desk with another cup of coffee steaming beside him. He looked up when Maya entered, surprise crossing his face. "You're here early," he said, setting down his red pen. "Having second thoughts about yesterday?" "No, sir," Maya replied, setting her tool bag down next to the truck. "I just wanted to get started. I have a lot of work to do." Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. Over his 20 years of teaching, he had seen plenty of students take on challenges they couldn't handle. But something about Maya's quiet determination reminded him of the best mechanics he had known. They were never the loudest ones in the room, but they got the job done. "Well, the truck is all yours," he said. "Just remember to follow safety procedures and don't try to move anything too heavy by yourself." Maya pulled on her work gloves and approached the truck. In the morning light streaming through the garage windows, the engine looked even worse than it had the day before. But Maya had learned from her grandfather that the worst-looking problems were often not as bad as they seemed. Sometimes what looked like disaster was just dirt and time. She started with the basics, just like her grandfather had taught her. Before you could fix anything, you had to understand what you were working with. Maya began by carefully cleaning away years of grime and oil buildup, using degreaser and old rags to slowly reveal what was underneath. As other students began arriving for class, Maya was already deep in her work. She barely noticed Jake and his friends gathering around other projects, occasionally glancing over at her with smirks and whispered comments. She was focused entirely on the engine in front of her. "Still playing mechanic, Rodriguez?" Jake called out during their lunch break. Most students had left the garage to eat in the cafeteria, but Maya had stayed behind with a sandwich, using the quiet time to continue her work. "Just working," Maya replied without looking up. She had discovered something interesting and didn't want to lose her train of thought. As she cleaned away more of the buildup, Maya began to notice things that didn't quite fit. The engine block had serial numbers that seemed wrong for the year of the truck. Some of the components looked more advanced than what should have been standard in the 1970s. And the craftsmanship was incredible. Everything was precision-made, far beyond what you would normally find in a regular pickup. By the end of the first week, Maya had the engine completely stripped down. Every bolt, every gasket, every component was laid out on clean shop rags, organized and labeled. Her notebook was filling up with sketches and measurements documenting everything she found. "Maya, this is impressive work," Mr. Peterson said, examining her organized workspace. "You're being very systematic about this." "My grandfather always said that rushing leads to mistakes," Maya replied, carefully cleaning another component. "He taught me that every engine tells a story, and you have to listen to what it's saying." What this engine was telling her was fascinating. The more Maya studied the individual parts, the more convinced she became that this was no ordinary truck. Engine. The engineering was too sophisticated, the materials too advanced, the design too innovative for something that should have been mass-produced decades ago. During her free periods, Maya found herself in the school library, researching vintage engines and automotive history. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, was initially surprised to see a student so interested in technical manuals and historical documents, but she quickly became helpful in tracking down obscure references and old magazines. "What exactly are you looking for, dear?" Mrs. Chen asked one afternoon, as Maya pored over a stack of 1960s automotive journals. "I'm trying to identify an engine," Maya explained. "The serial numbers don't match anything I can find in the standard references. It's like it doesn't officially exist." That evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, continuing her research. Her parents were used to her mechanical interests, though they sometimes worried that she spent too much time with engines and not enough time with friends her own age. "How's the truck project going, Mija?" her father asked, looking over her shoulder at the screen full of technical specifications. "It's complicated, Dad," Maya replied. "I think this engine might be something special, but I can't figure out what it is yet." Her father smiled. Maya's grandfather had passed away 3 years earlier, but his influence on her was still strong. The old man would have been proud to see his granddaughter tackling such a challenging project. Meanwhile, at school, Maya's classmates were growing increasingly skeptical about her chances. 3 weeks had passed since she accepted Jake's dare, and the truck still wasn't running. To most of them, it looked like she was just taking apart an engine without any real plan to put it back together. "She's been at this for weeks," Jake told his friends during lunch. "All she's doing is cleaning parts and drawing pictures in that notebook. She has no idea what she's doing." Even some of Maya's friends from other classes were beginning to doubt. During study hall, her friend Lisa approached her with concern written on her face. "Maya, are you sure about this truck thing?" Lisa asked quietly. "Everyone's talking about how you're going to fail Jake's challenge. Maybe you should just quit before it gets worse." Maya looked up from her notebook where she had been sketching possible assembly sequences. "I'm not quitting, Lisa. I know what I'm doing, even if it doesn't look like it." But privately, Maya was beginning to feel the pressure. She had never attempted anything this complex before, and the weight of everyone's expectations was getting heavy. Some nights she lay awake wondering if Jake was right, if she really didn't belong in auto shop class. Then, on a Thursday evening in her 4th week of work, Maya made a discovery that changed everything. She was cross-referencing serial numbers from the engine components with old patent filings when she found something that made her heart race. One of the numbers matched a patent filed in 1967 for an experimental engine design. The patent holder was listed as Elena Vasquez, described as an automotive engineer working for a small research company in Detroit. But what really caught Maya's attention was the engine's specifications. It promised fuel efficiency that was decades ahead of its time. Maya spent the rest of the evening researching Elena Vasquez, but information was scarce. She found a few brief mentions in trade journals, always describing her as a brilliant engineer working on revolutionary designs. But then, abruptly, the references stopped appearing after 1968. The next day at school, Maya could barely contain her excitement. She had found a connection, a clue that might explain why this engine was so unusual. But she also knew that she needed more evidence before she could be sure of anything. "You seem different today," Mr. Peterson observed as Maya worked with renewed energy on reassembling the engine. "Find something interesting?" "Maybe," Maya replied, carefully fitting a precision-machined component into place. "I think this engine might have some history behind it." As word spread that Maya was actually making progress on the impossible truck, more students began stopping by to watch her work. Some were genuinely curious, while others were hoping to see her fail spectacularly. But Maya tried to ignore the attention and focus on the intricate process of bringing the engine back to life. Jake, meanwhile, was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. What had started as a simple way to embarrass Maya was turning into something much bigger. She clearly knew what she was doing, and her methodical approach was starting to impress even the students who had initially doubted her. "Maybe we should call off the bet," Jake's friend Tommy suggested quietly. "She might actually pull this off." But Jake's pride wouldn't let him back down. He had made the challenge public, and now he was stuck with it, regardless of how it turned out. By the end of her 5th week, Maya had the engine almost completely reassembled. Every component had been cleaned, repaired, or replaced as needed. The precision of the original engineering had become even more apparent as she worked. This was clearly the product of someone with exceptional skill and knowledge. Late one evening, as Maya was putting the finishing touches on her work, she made another discovery that sent chills down her spine. Hidden inside the engine block, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a small envelope with EV written on it in faded ink. With trembling hands, Maya carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper with technical drawings and notes, written in a woman's handwriting. At the bottom, in the same careful script, was a signature. Elena Vasquez, 1968. Maya stared at the document, her mind racing. This wasn't just any old engine. It was a prototype, possibly the only surviving example of Elena Vasquez's revolutionary design. And somehow, it had ended up in an old pickup truck, forgotten and abandoned for decades. As she carefully refolded the document and placed it back in the envelope, Maya realized that she was holding something that could change automotive history. But first, she had to prove that the engine could still run after all these years. Tomorrow would be the day of truth. Either her weeks of painstaking work would pay off, or Jake would get to see her fail in front of the entire class. But Maya wasn't thinking about Jake anymore. She was thinking about Elena Vasquez and the incredible legacy that had been waiting all these years for someone to discover it. Maya barely slept that night. She kept thinking about Elena Vasquez's hidden document and what it meant. The technical drawings showed modifications and improvements that were decades ahead of their time. But more than that, the notes revealed the passion of someone who truly believed she could change the world through engineering. She arrived at school even earlier than usual, her stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Today was the day she would find out if 6 weeks of work had been worth it. The engine was complete, every component carefully restored and assembled. But the real test was whether it would actually run. Mr. Peterson was waiting for her in the auto shop, looking almost as nervous as she felt. Word had spread throughout the school that today was Maya's big day, and he knew that a lot more than just a grade was riding on this moment. "You ready for this, Maya?" he asked, sipping his morning coffee with hands that seemed a little unsteady. "As ready as I'll ever be," Maya replied, though her voice wavered slightly. She had run through every connection, double-checked every system, but there were still 1,000 things that could go wrong. As the morning progressed, students began filtering into the auto shop for their regular classes. But today was different. Word had gotten around that Maya was finally going to test the engine that everyone said couldn't be fixed. Students from other classes started finding excuses to walk by the garage, and even some teachers were peeking in to see what would happen. Jake arrived with his usual group of friends, but he looked uncomfortable. Over the past few weeks, watching Maya's methodical work, he had begun to realize that she might actually know what she was doing. The confident smirk he usually wore was replaced by something that looked almost like worry. "Big day, Rodriguez," he said, but his voice lacked its usual mocking tone. "You sure you're ready for this?" Maya looked at him steadily. "We'll find out, won't we?" By lunchtime, nearly half the school seemed to know about Maya's challenge. Students kept coming by the auto shop to get a look at the restored truck. The engine bay, which had been a disaster of rust and corrosion 6 weeks earlier, now gleamed with clean metal and fresh paint. Every wire was perfectly routed, every component precisely placed. "Maya, this looks incredible," said David Park, one of the students who had initially tried to fix the truck himself. "I can't believe this is the same engine we saw on the first day." Even Miguel Santos, who had claimed his father's garage experience made him an expert, was impressed. "I've got to admit, Rodriguez, this is professional-level work. My dad would be proud of restoration like this." But looking good and running were two different things, as everyone knew. Maya had seen plenty of beautiful engines that wouldn't start, and everyone in the auto shop had heard stories of restorations that looked perfect, but had one small problem that kept them from working. As the afternoon class period began, the garage was more crowded than it had ever been. Students who were supposed to be working on their own projects kept glancing over at Maya's truck. The air was thick with anticipation, and the smell of motor oil and metal cleaner. "All right, everyone, back to your own work," Mr. Peterson called out, but even he kept looking over at Maya as she made her final preparations. "Maya, take your time, no pressure." But Maya could feel the pressure from every direction. Dozens of eyes were watching her every move. She could hear whispered conversations and nervous laughter. Jake stood nearby with his arms crossed, trying to look confident but clearly anxious about how this would turn out. Maya took a deep breath and tried to remember everything her grandfather had taught her. "Trust your work," she whispered to herself, repeating one of his favorite sayings. "If you did it right, it will run right." She began her final checks, methodically going through every system one last time. Fuel lines, secure. Electrical connections, tight and clean. Oil pressure, good. Coolant levels, perfect. Everything looked exactly as it should. The moment of truth had arrived. Maya climbed into the driver's seat, her hand trembling slightly. As she reached for the key, the entire garage had gone completely silent. Even Mr. Peterson had stopped grading papers and was watching intently. "Come on," Maya whispered, turning the key to the first position to activate the electrical system. Dashboard lights flickered on, glowing amber and red in the dim garage. So far, so good. She took another deep breath and turned the key to start the engine. The starter motor engaged with a strong, steady sound. For a moment, nothing else happened. Then incredibly, the engine turned over once, twice, and on the third compression stroke it caught. The sound that filled the garage was unlike anything they had heard before. This wasn't the rough idle of a typical old truck engine. Instead, the motor purred with a smoothness that seemed impossible for something that had been completely seized just 6 weeks earlier. The rhythm was perfect, steady, and strong, without the slightest hesitation or rough spot. The silence in the garage was replaced by gasps of amazement and scattered applause. Maya sat in the driver's seat, hardly believing what she was hearing. The engine wasn't just running, it was running. Better than most new engines she had ever heard. "Unbelievable," Mr. Peterson said, his voice filled with genuine amazement. "Maya, that sounds absolutely perfect." But Maya was thinking about more than just the smooth idle. As she listened to the engine, she could hear something special in its rhythm. This wasn't just any restored motor. This was Elena Vasquez's revolutionary design, running exactly as it had been intended to run more than 50 years ago. Jake stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. He had expected Maya to fail, had been planning what he would say when the engine wouldn't start. Instead, he was listening to the most beautiful engine sound he had ever heard, created by the girl he had tried to embarrass. "How did you do this?" David Park asked, his voice full of respect. "This thing was completely dead when we started." Maya climbed out of the truck, her legs still shaky from adrenaline and relief. "A lot of patience," she said simply. "And some help from someone who knew what she was doing a long time ago." As the engine continued to purr, Maya knew it was time to share what she had discovered. She walked over to her workbench and picked up the folder where she had carefully documented her research over the past few weeks. "This isn't just any engine," she began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "This is a prototype that was supposed to change the automotive industry forever." She opened the folder and showed them copies of the patent documents she had found, along with the photographs she had taken of Elena Vasquez's hidden notes. As she explained her discoveries, the crowd around her grew larger and more amazed. Elena Vasquez was one of the first female automotive engineers, Maya continued. In the 1960s, she designed an engine that could get 60% better fuel efficiency than anything else available. But the industry wasn't ready for her ideas, especially not from a woman. Mr. Peterson examined the documents with growing excitement. He had heard stories about revolutionary engines that had been suppressed or lost over the years, but he had never expected to see one in his own classroom. "According to my research," Maya went on, "this prototype was supposed to be destroyed in a factory fire in 1968. Somehow it survived and ended up in this old truck where it sat forgotten for decades." The implications of Maya's discovery were starting to sink in. This wasn't just about fixing a broken engine for a class project. This was about recovering lost technology that could still have an impact on modern automotive design. "Maya, do you realize what this means?" Mr. Peterson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This engine could be studied by modern engineers. Elena Vasquez's work doesn't have to stay lost." As word spread through the school about Maya's success, more and more people came to see the impossible truck that was now running perfectly in the auto shop garage. Teachers from other departments stopped by, administrators came to investigate the commotion, and students kept arriving to hear the story and see the engine for themselves. But Maya's attention was focused on Jake, who had been standing silently since the engine started. Their bet seemed almost trivial now compared to what she had discovered, but it still mattered. He had challenged her right to be in the auto shop, and she had proven him completely wrong. "Jake," she said quietly, walking over to where he stood, "I think you owe me an apology." Jake looked at her, then at the perfectly running engine, then back at her. His face was red with embarrassment, but there was also something else there, genuine respect. "Maya," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I was wrong. About everything. You don't just belong in this class, you're probably the best mechanic any of us will ever meet." The apology felt good, But Maya was already thinking beyond the classroom drama. She was thinking about Elena Vasquez, about the brilliant woman whose work had been forgotten for so long. She was thinking about all the other young women who might be inspired to pursue engineering if they knew this story. As the afternoon sun streamed through the garage windows illuminating the restored truck and its miraculous engine, Maya realized that her grandfather had been right about engines being puzzles. But some puzzles, when solved, revealed treasures far more valuable than anyone had imagined. The quiet girl who had accepted a dare 6 weeks earlier had become something much more important. She had become the keeper of a lost legacy and the bridge between a forgotten pioneer and a future full of possibilities. The news about Maya's discovery spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By the next morning, Mr. Peterson had already received 3 phone calls from local newspapers wanting to interview the teenager who had found a lost piece of automotive history. The principal, Mrs. Davis, stopped by the auto shop before first period to see the famous engine for herself. Maya, I have to admit, when I heard about this project, I thought it was just another student taking on more than they could handle, Mrs. Davis said, listening to the smooth purr of the engine. But this is remarkable. You've made our entire school proud. Maya felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the running engine. For so long she had felt like she was fighting to prove herself every single day. Now suddenly, people were seeing her the way her grandfather always had, as someone who could solve problems that others thought were impossible. The local newspaper reporter arrived during third period, a friendly woman named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in human interest stories. She spent an hour interviewing Maya about her discovery, taking pictures of the restored truck and listening to the incredible story of Elena Vasquez. How did it feel when you realized what you had found? Rebecca asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Maya thought for a moment before answering. At first I couldn't believe it. I mean, what are the chances that something this important would end up in our classroom? But then I started thinking about Elena Vasquez and how she must have felt when her work was dismissed and forgotten. I felt like I had to tell her story. The newspaper article came out 3 days later, with a front-page headline that read, "Local Teen Discovers Lost Automotive Treasure." The story included Maya's photo standing proudly next to the restored truck, along with copies of Elena Vasquez's original drawings and patent documents. But the local newspaper was just the beginning. By the end of the week, Maya's story had been picked up by automotive magazines and websites across the country. Classic car enthusiasts were fascinated by the discovery of a prototype that had been thought lost forever. Engineering professors were excited about the chance to study Elena Vasquez's innovative designs. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Dr. Catherine Williams from the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History called Mr. Peterson directly, asking to speak with Maya about her discovery. "The Smithsonian wants to talk to me," Maya asked, hardly believing what she was hearing. She had visited the famous museum on a school trip to Washington 2 years earlier, never imagining that someday she might have something they would want to display. The conversation with Dr. Williams was both exciting and overwhelming. The museum was very interested in acquiring the engine for a new exhibit about forgotten innovators in American industry. They wanted to tell Elena Vasquez's story alongside other pioneers whose contributions had been overlooked by history. "Your discovery gives us a chance to honor a brilliant woman whose work deserves to be remembered," Dr. Williams explained during their phone call. "And your own story, a young woman uncovering the lost work of another female engineer. That's exactly the kind of inspiration we want to share with our visitors." Maya's parents were amazed by the attention their daughter was receiving. Her father took time off work to accompany her to interviews, proud but also protective of his 16-year-old daughter, who was suddenly thrust into the spotlight. "I always knew Maya was special," her mother told Rebecca Torres during a follow-up interview. "But even I didn't expect something like this. Her grandfather would have been so proud." The attention wasn't limited to museums and newspapers. Major automotive companies began reaching out, interested in studying Elena Vasquez's engine design to see what modern applications it might have. Ford, General Motors, and Toyota all sent representatives to examine the prototype and discuss the potential for incorporating its efficiency improvements into current engine technology. This could actually help reduce emissions and improve fuel economy in today's vehicles, explained Dr. James Chen, a senior engineer from Ford's research division. Elena Vasquez was decades ahead of her time, and Maya's discovery could help us catch up to her vision. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from other young women interested in automotive engineering. Maya began receiving letters and emails from girls across the country who had been inspired by her story. Many shared their own experiences of feeling out of place in male-dominated technical classes, and Maya's success gave them hope that they too could make their mark in the field. One letter particularly touched Maya's heart. It came from a 17-year-old girl named Carmen in Texas who wrote, "I'm the only girl in my school's automotive program, and some days I wonder if I'm crazy for trying. But reading about what you did makes me want to keep going. Maybe I'll discover something important too." Maya made a point of responding to every letter she received. She remembered how isolated she had felt before her discovery, and she wanted other young women to know they weren't alone in their passion for engineering and mechanics. The transformation in Maya's auto shop class was just as remarkable as the attention from the outside world. Jake, who had once questioned her right to be there, became one of her strongest supporters. He helped her organize all the correspondence she was receiving, and even started a school club focused on automotive history and innovation. "I learned something important from watching Maya work," Jake told the local TV news reporter who came to do a follow-up story. "Real skill doesn't have anything to do with whether you're male or female. It's about dedication, knowledge, and never giving up when something seems impossible." Mr. Peterson found himself dealing with a waiting list of students who wanted to join his auto shop classes. Maya's success had sparked new interest in hands-on engineering throughout the school, and he was thrilled to see so many young people excited about learning mechanical skills. "Maya has shown everyone that there are still discoveries to be made," he told the school board during a meeting about expanding the technical education program. "She's proven that when we give students the freedom to explore and the tools to succeed, amazing things can happen." 6 months after Maya first accepted Jake's dare, she found herself standing in the Smithsonian Museum, looking at Elena Vasquez's engine displayed in a place of honor. A plaque next to the exhibit told both women's stories: the brilliant engineer, whose work had been forgotten, and the determined teenager who brought it back to light. The exhibit had become one of the museum's most popular attractions. Families with young children stopped to read Elena's story and learn about the importance of recognizing contributions from all inventors, regardless of their gender. Engineering students came to study the innovative design that was decades ahead of its time. But Maya was most proud of the school groups that visited, especially when she saw young girls looking at the display with wonder in their eyes. She often volunteered as a guide, sharing the story of her discovery and encouraging students to pursue their own interest in science and engineering. "The most important thing I learned," Maya would tell visiting students, "is that the biggest discoveries often come from the most unexpected places." Elena Vasquez's work was hidden in an old truck that everyone thought was worthless. But when you look deeper, when you really pay attention, you might find something that changes everything. Maya's discovery also led to the establishment of the Elena Vasquez Scholarship Fund, providing financial support for young women pursuing careers in automotive engineering. Major corporations contributed to the fund, recognizing the importance of encouraging diversity in technical fields. The first scholarship recipient was Carmen, the girl from Texas, who had written to Maya. She was accepted into MIT's mechanical engineering program with full funding, following the path that Maya herself had chosen for college. "I never thought I'd be able to afford a school like MIT," Carmen told Maya during the scholarship presentation ceremony. "But your discovery didn't just honor Elena Vasquez, it opened doors for girls like us who want to be engineers." As Maya prepared to graduate from high school, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that day when Jake dared her to fix an impossible engine. She had gained confidence, recognition, and opportunities she never could have imagined. But more importantly, she had learned that sometimes the most meaningful achievements come from preserving and honoring the work of others. The quiet girl who had once wondered if she belonged in auto shop class was now headed to MIT with a full scholarship and a clear sense of purpose. She wanted to become the kind of engineer Elena Vasquez had been, someone who pushed boundaries, solved problems others thought impossible, and inspired the next generation to reach even higher. On her last day of high school, Maya stopped by the auto shop one final time. The space where Elena's prototype had once sat was now occupied by another challenging project, another student ready to tackle something everyone said couldn't be done. "Good luck," Maya whispered to the new student, a freshman girl who reminded her of herself 2 years earlier. "Remember, the most important discoveries are usually hiding in plain sight. You just have to be brave enough to look." As Maya walked out of the garage and into her future, she carried with her the most valuable lesson of all, that determination, curiosity, and the courage to challenge expectations could uncover treasures that change not just your own life, but the lives of countless others. Elena Vasquez's legacy lived on, not just in the museum display, but in every young woman who now believed that she too could make history through engineering and innovation.